All right, welcome everybody to Ayurveda Fundamentals 101. Start to share my screen with you for these slides. All right, so Ayurveda, yoga's sister science. What the heck is this thing? For some of you, this is brand new information. Others of you have received this workshop before, but there's so much information in it. It can never hurt to have a refresh and a repeat. And I will ask if everybody can just go ahead and mute themselves. You just actually go out of here and I think I can mute everybody. Don't get any background noise going. Okay, so I'll start us off with a prayer. If you know this one, you can chant along. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvina Vadhi Tamastu Ma Vivishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. This translates to Om, may we be protected together, may we be nourished together, may we work vigorously together, and may our studies illuminate us. May there be no dislike between us, let there be peace, peace, peace. Right, so I always start off every presentation with giving credit where credit is due to my teachers, because I did not discover any of this information. It has all been passed down from teacher to student over thousands and thousands of years. And so these teachers also will give credit where credit is due and pass it along to their teachers and their teachers, their teachers, and so forth, until we reach thousands of years ago when this information was originally given to us from the ancient rishis, or the ancient seers of yoga and the other Vedic sciences. We have down on the right-hand side, Michael Curtis of Yoga Central and the Yoga Place in Canton, who most of y'all know. And then on the left-hand side over here, we have Ginger Kamalesh Hooven, who is my teacher for yoga and Ayurveda, especially my higher level 300-hour yoga training, and her teacher, Baba Hari Das, the founder of the Mount Madonna Institute in Santa Cruz, California, which is where I studied for my 300-hour yoga teacher training. Some of you all know Swami Shankarananda as well in the bottom left-hand corner. He is a Swami of the Shivananda order, so meaning he's taken certain vows of renunciation of material possessions and certain types of relationships and so forth. And he also comes to Yoga Central to lead silent retreats. So some of you might know him from that. And then for my Ayurveda training, we have Katie Silcox here on the left-hand side. I just completed her 600-hour Ayurvedic health counselor training online. And for some of my priestess training, we have Lady Grail Corsini here on the bottom center part. And she is the facilitator of the Goddess Temple of Ashland, Oregon. Okay, so this presentation is broken down into 5 parts. Right now, we're starting at the beginning with the introduction. Again, what is this Ayurveda thing? We'll move into the 3 doshas, or the 3 Ayurvedic mind-body types, and define those. And then we get to take a quiz and see what our personal doshas are, our personal Ayurvedic mind-body constitution. And I do have a PDF of that quiz that was emailed to you, if you'd like to print it out and do it that way. The last couple components here, practical applications of Ayurveda, so taking the big picture and making it more defined for our everyday lives. And then lastly, and possibly most helpful, the 5 Ayurvedic practices that are generally recommended for everyone that we will go over, and then questions and answers. And some of you have submitted questions already. Okay, so Ayurveda. Let's just start with the pronunciation. Ayurveda. Ayurveda. So Ayur translates to life. Veda translates to science. So yoga, Ayurveda, Tantra, and a couple other things are considered Vedic sciences, which is kind of redundant because Veda means science. So sciencey sciences coming from ancient India and that area of the world. So Ayurveda translates as the science of life. And it's an ancient system of holistic healthcare that helps align us with the cycles of nature, where our lovely human brains have pulled us pretty far away from our natural human rhythms and the natural rhythms of earth and nature itself. And so this is a preventative healthcare strategy that allows us to realign with those natural cycles and actually harness our own highest potential. So it considers our health on every level. That means physical, energetic, psychological, and spiritual. And it considers all of those components as being very interconnected, inseparable. And so a physical symptom might, in Ayurveda, we might consider it to actually have an energetic or a psychological or even a spiritual cause. And as I mentioned, being one of the Vedic sciences, this science of Ayurveda co-evolved in India / Southeast Asia alongside of yoga, Tantra, and the other Vedic sciences. So that's a basic definition of Ayurveda. How can we actually use Ayurveda in this day and age? It's an ancient science. Why do we care about it today? Well, as I mentioned, most of us are living in a state that's not in harmony with nature. We're quite out of balance with our natural rhythms, for example, the circadian rhythm. And living out of the state of harmony and alignment creates imbalance, and that imbalance actually causes disease. So if we even break down the word disease, dis-ease, a lack of ease, that can mean that in Ayurveda, anything from just having a little bit of gas, a little bit of constipation is actually considered one of the 6 stages of disease. So Ayurveda breaks it down a lot more thoroughly than Western medicine does. And actually, the majority of disease progressions cannot even be detected by Western medical tests and diagnostic tools until about the 4th stage. So that leaves stages 1 to 3 that we're just having mild symptoms. Typically, people don't go to the doctor until it's stage 4 and past, because that's when the symptoms get really, really hard to deal with, or at least uncomfortable enough to where people are like, okay, I need help with this. But before it gets to stage number 4, we have many opportunities that our body gives us to actually notice that there's an imbalance and address it at the root so that it can never get out of hand. So that's why Ayurveda is an amazing preventative healthcare system. And that's not to say that it should replace Western medicine in any way. Where Western medicine really shines in terms of the treatment of progressed disease, like I mentioned, and symptoms therein, where Ayurveda doesn't. I mean, it can do that if you go to see an Ayurvedic doctor, but for the most part, Ayurveda is focusing on the preventative aspect, the self-care, and increasing quality of life. So Ayurveda can certainly help to mitigate symptoms, if not treat them once a disease has progressed. But again, it really shines in terms of just preventing the disease to start with, where Western medicine can then help us once the disease has progressed. So these two are not adversaries. They can actually go together really well and just work together beautifully. So if you ever do work on Ayurveda or with an Ayurvedic counselor like myself, I always encourage you to also just include me or that tool alongside the rest of your healthcare team. A couple of my favorite Ayurvedic proverbs, like yoga, Ayurveda is anti-dogmatic in that it provides a framework for introspection. So some of these proverbs are like increases like, and opposites bring balance. So yoga helps us to understand how we're feeling in our bodies. Ayurveda can also help us to do the same thing. An example of like increases like and opposites bring balance that I always like to use is I'm a very fiery person. In Ayurveda, that dosha is pitta, fire and water. So if I go and I drink a hot coffee in the middle of summer and I go to a 10 a.m. hot power vinyasa flow, every single time, it never fails, I end up feeling super irritable, grouchy, just like exhausted for the rest of the day afterward. Even though like I did some healthy stuff, I went to yoga, but it's because coffee is heating, it's summertime, hot yoga obviously is heating, and then vinyasa is just like intense and getting everything going. And so it increases that fire element in the body, which can create fiery emotions like anger and irritability. So an example of opposites bringing balance is instead, me, the same person, same time of year, which is summer, if I decide to go and drink some coconut water instead, coconut water is very cooling. And then instead of a hot power yoga, I can still do yoga, but maybe it's like a slow flow or a gentle restorative in a regular temperature room, not a hot room, that can actually bring down the fire element and cause more peaceful emotions, and actually help with symptoms like heated emotions like that irritability. So like increases like, and opposites bring balance. Everything is medicine and everything is poison. I love this proverb because, again, Ayurveda is anti-dogmatic, where we have this kind of Western diet culture of I have to eat this and I can't eat that and I have to be good. Oh, I've been good all week, so now I deserve to have a reward of like something, whatever my guilty pleasure food is. Instead of having that almost like shameful or like punishment and reward attitude about food, Ayurveda encourages us to have a mindful approach to our eating. And that mindful approach includes not shaming ourselves and also not thinking of things as like a reward, because then we're thinking of food as being inherently bad or good instead of what food really is, right? Which is fuel for our bodies. And us humans have, in our current place in evolution, we've managed to find ourselves in a very complicated relationship with food because for the first time in human history, developed countries at least, we have an overabundance of food. Undeveloped countries and even some places in developed countries still do not have regular access to food. But for the majority of us living in the Western world, we're very privileged to be able to walk into a grocery store and just have aisles and aisles and aisles of food. And since we are biologically programmed to crave certain things like sugar, fat, and salt, we will have like a reward or almost an addictive attitude around food. Anyway, I digress. The last Ayurvedic proverb that I really love is "it depends." Once again, Ayurveda being anti-dogmatic. So I can give you recommendations, and there will be recommendations within this presentation, but at the end of the day, you know what is best for yourself, and there's no one size fits all approach. So you might hear of fad diets being like, or if you ever get those ads sometimes that are like, this person just did this one trick, just eat this one specific food or do this one trick and you'll lose all this weight and everything will be hunky-dory. No, that's BS because it's not simple like that. Our bodies are very complex. Our minds are very complex. And unfortunately, it's not as simple as just taking a magic pill. And in Ayurveda, everything is very individualized and customized. So the answer for one person might look completely different from the answer to the same question, but for another person, because it depends on that person's constitution, where they are in their life, the nature of their symptoms, the time of year, even the time of day. There's so much nuance that goes into this. And that's where it's really an intuitive approach to food and lifestyle and just honoring ourselves from a place of knowing ourselves on the inside rather than external authority dictating for us what is best for us. Okay, let's just take a moment, take a breath here. Absorbing this information. Next, we'll be moving into the 3 doshas or the 3 Ayurvedic mind-body types. And I want to preface this by saying, please do not get too hung up on your dosha. Everybody has all three of the doshas within them, just in different ratios. And while most of us will tend to be predominant in one of the three, that's actually less important than just finding what balance feels like in your body and mind personally. And so it's good to be aware of our dosha, but it's more important to be aware of how we can find balance within ourselves. Okay, so before we talk about the doshas, we need to just briefly mention the elements, the 5 elements that are found all throughout the universe, all throughout material creation, and those are earth, water, fire, air, and ether or spirit. And these same 5 elements comprise everything from the planets to our planet to our bodies. And these elements also make up the 3 doshas, the 3 mind-body types. The word dosha itself is a Sanskrit word. It translates to fault. It also translates as something that is in constant motion or that which can cause problems. I don't love that interpretation just because it's a negative one. I like to think of the doshas like the tectonic plates on Earth and how the tectonic plates rub against each other. And that place where they meet is called a fault line. And that's where mountains are formed and canyons and volcanoes and so forth. So just like the tectonic plates on Earth are constantly moving and shifting around and creating our circumstances on Earth, the doshas are also constantly moving and shifting around and creating circumstances within our minds and our bodies. So the 3 doshas are vata, pitta, and kapha. Vata is made of the air and ether elements. Pitta is the fire and water elements, and kapha is the water and earth elements. Let's start with vata dosha. So again, this is the dosha that is made up of the air and ether elements. Some other qualities that describe this dosha are light, dry, cold, rough, moving or mobile, and clear. When I think of this dosha, I like to think of the fall season because in fall, at least here in Ohio, the leaves start to dry up and fall off of the trees, and the leaves are really light and dry and crunchy and rough. And there's typically lots of wind. And things start to cool down this time of year, right? I also noticed that around vata season, which is the fall time, a lot of people fall sick, which makes sense because anytime there's a seasonal transition, vata goes up. And anytime we have increased vata, we tend to see more symptoms and sickness. If this vata dosha is in balance, then we might feel very creative, open-minded. A person might be very just enthusiastic and spiritual, but that same person might feel a little bit ungrounded, especially if vata is out of balance. Could feel anxious, overwhelmed, or fearful, could feel scattered, have difficulty focusing. And examples of a physical symptom would be constipation, just general dryness in the body, bloating, gas. Okay. And I also wanted to say with vata, it doesn't matter what your constitution is. The majority of people do have at least a slight vata imbalance, simply because vata is the dosha that goes out of balance most easily because it's the air and ether element. It's sometimes referred to as the king of doshas because it kind of controls the other 2, just in the sense that if vata is out of balance, everything else starts to go out of balance. And we also live in a very vata aggravating culture, constantly being on screens, looking at our phones, all the notifications, just all of the like bombardment of information constantly, and then just living very busy lifestyles as well. It is super easy for vata to go out of balance. So pretty much every Ayurveda client that I work with, there's a small vata dosha imbalance. So we'll focus on vata a little bit more than the other 2 today for that reason. Moving on to pitta dosha though, pitta is the elements of fire and water, as I mentioned. And some other qualities that describe pitta are hot, sharp, light, oily, moving or mobile again, and spreading. So I like to think of oil when you put it on the pan, how it's moving, oily, spreading, and then it gets hot very quickly, right? Because oil conducts heat. So when this dosha is in balance in our minds and bodies, a person can feel very decisive, good leader. And because it's the fire element, this person may have a lot of like transformational qualities, just love to get in there and do the work. And again, enthusiasm, more so for some kind of transformation, change, improvement in the world. So very passionate type of people. The converse of that though, when pitta is out of balance, a person might feel very easily angered, irritable, critical and judgmental, or if there's too much heat in the body, this can manifest as heartburn, acid reflux, or burning indigestion, things like acne, since pitta also rules the skin. But so we want a good amount of that pitta for our digestion to be healthy and regular, and for our minds to be nice and clear and focused, but not too much pitta dosha, because as I mentioned in my example with the hot yoga, can also be very prone to burnout and exhausting itself. Also, because of that, like criticism and judgment, sometimes pitta types can be prone to pitta type depression, which is just very hard on itself and critical of itself and others. Finally, we have kapha dosha. This is comprised of the earth and water elements, and some other qualities of kapha are dense, slow, cool, smooth, soft, and static. And this is considered a structural dosha. This is the dosha that rules your bones, your muscles, fat, and it is the foundation, the building blocks of the other two doshas. With kapha dosha being in balance, a person might feel very peaceful, calm, and affectionate. This type of person really values stability and practicality, security, especially like material, financial security. So if you know somebody that this sounds like, they probably are pretty good at making money and saving money. However, the inverse of that, when this dosha is out of balance, a person can struggle with greed or just being overly attached to either things or people, or just a mindset in general. They can struggle with stubbornness, a different type of depression, which is more of like that heavy depression where somebody's laying in bed for hours and hours and really having a hard time getting going and being motivated. And then just that trouble letting go, feelings of like sadness, living in the past, and so forth. And so we can see how we really want all three of these doshas to be nice and balanced in order for our own optimal health. A little bit more information just to help visualize this concept, the Ayurvedic mind-body types. So for Vata dosha, the air and ether dosha, we tend to see a more thin body frame. These types will have fluctuating weight, or they might struggle to put on weight. They might be very tall or just have irregular body proportions or body shapes. And their eyes are likely to be small and quickly moving. They might have dry skin, dry hair, dry nails, and a light voice, quick movements, high-pitched voice, just for an example. Pitta dosha, these individuals tend to have a medium build, tend to be more naturally muscular, and just well-defined muscles, well-defined like jawline, sharp features in the face, eyes, nose, chin, and their hair tends to be oily. This depiction shows red hair, which is very pitta. Brunette or brown hair is also considered a pitta quality, and just oily hair, oily skin, redness in the skin as well, considered very pitta. And then the eyes will be very sharp and penetrating. For kapha dosha, these individuals tend to have a little bit thicker body frame, heavier bone structure, thick muscles, very naturally strong, and naturally very endurant. So these folks might be able to drink a lot of alcohol or just take on a lot in terms of substances without really feeling a whole lot because they have that earth to keep them stable. These folks also are likely to have really luscious, beautiful hair, luscious eyelashes, big, beautiful eyes. Blue eyes are associated with kapha, and curly, thick hair also associated with kapha. The skin more like cool to the touch and thick and strong. Whoop. There we go. So if you're curious, because just looking at a person isn't really enough to tell their dosha, we really have to do a full assessment, which we'll get an idea of a full assessment in just a moment here. But one way that you can find out your bone structure is by taking your wrist and then using your hands, your fingers on your other hand, and see which finger will touch. I'll go out of the screen share so you can see better. So if you can touch your pinky to your thumb, you probably have a Vata type bone structure. If you can touch your middle or your index, it's probably more kapha. If you could only touch middle, that's definitely kapha because middle is your longest finger. If you can touch index or ring, that's more pitta, just because those are more moderate. So if you can get all the way to pinky, vata. If you can only get to middle, kapha. If you can do index or ring finger, but not the pinky, and then middle is too much, then pitta type bone structure. There's a question in the chat. Can doshas change throughout time? Good question. Yes, I will address that when we get to section 4, practical applications. Okay. So let us go on to the next section. Whoa, that's not what I wanted. There. Quiz time. What's your dosha? Okay, so if you're watching the recording, I have emailed you a PDF of the dosha quiz. You can print that out or just simply use what's on the screen to answer your questions. If you're with me live, same thing. You can either pull it up from your email or I do have it here on the screen for you. There's 2 slides. So go ahead and find either this quiz that's printed out and a pen, or if you just have a piece of scrap paper around, go ahead and find that and we'll start to fill this out. A couple notes, please fill this out from the perspective of your whole entire life. So not just how you've been feeling for the past week or the past year, but your general tendencies throughout your life. And then if you have any that you want to, if you like really resonating with multiple columns, you can totally check mark multiple columns. That's fine. You can do 2 or even 3 if you can't decide. And then once we get to the bottom, we will add them all up and see what answer we get. And if you've taken a dosha quiz before, I do recommend just going ahead and taking this one again. I always recommend that folks take multiple dosha quizzes. If you've seen an Ayurvedic practitioner, they will give you the most accurate assessment because they will take literally every single thing about your body and your health history and your current tendencies into consideration. So this will give you a good just baseline idea though. All right, so I'm gonna mute myself and just give you guys some time here. Here's the second part of the quiz now. All right, so once you are getting to the end, go ahead and tally up all of your results. And once you've done that, so at the bottom, you'll have a number for each of your totals. And so just for an example, I'll use myself. So I might have something like 17 for Pitta and 14 for Vata and only 7 or 6 for Kapha. And so based on that, my Ayurvedic mind body type would be Pitta Vata. So you can discern for yourself based on your numbers. So it would be largest number first, and then the second number. Most of us, like I said, will be predominant in 1 or sometimes 1 or 2. Others of us, it's more rare, but it is possible to be tridoshic, meaning that you have an equal or nearly equal amount of all 3 doshas. But again, don't get too hung up on your constitution, because it's more important to make sure that all of the doshas are always balanced. And so we had a question in the chat about if doshas can change over the lifetime in terms of like the actual imbalance of doshas. So yes, very good question. The constitution, which is why I asked you guys to fill this out based on your entire life, that does not change. Your mind-body constitution stays the same throughout your life. The imbalance is what changes. So yes, so we typically have 2 different things that we're looking at when completing an Ayurvedic assessment. We have the constitution, a person's baseline, if you will, and then we have the current imbalance, which is what we're attempting to treat, because the imbalance is what causes the symptoms. And doshas can also be affected by a person's time of life, which we'll go over in the next section. So just taking a moment again to breathe, just come centered, continuing to absorb all of this info. As we move right along, just continue to put any questions in the chat. There was another question about when I was talking about the body or physical characteristics of the doshas, what would be considered overweight? I'm sure there's a more specific answer to that question. I don't have an answer for that. I would just say whatever, if something causes somebody to feel uncomfortable, if someone's carrying extra weight that ends up making them feel uncomfortable or not easeful in their body, that is what we would consider excess weight within reason, right? Because I know a lot of folks do struggle with like disordered eating and disordered relationship to food. So there's a mental component to that comfort, right? That's a little bit of a longer discussion outside of the scope of this presentation. Okay, so we'll talk about practical applications for Ayurveda. How can we apply these doshas to our daily lives? So the doshas, as I mentioned, correspond with the time of a person's life. They also correspond with seasons of the year and even the time of day. So These doshas are constantly moving, shifting, and fluctuating. Between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., and then 2 p.m. and 6 p.m., we have vata time. Between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m., 6 p.m. and 10 p.m., we have kapha time. And then 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., we have pitta time. So examples of this. Most people, especially once we're starting to progress in life, will experience more difficulty sleeping, typically starting around the 30s or later in life. And oftentimes those people will experience waking up suddenly between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Whether that's just to go to the bathroom, whether that's insomnia, just getting up and not being able to go back to sleep for a couple hours. And those same people might find that as soon as 6 a.m. rolls around, all of a sudden they can sleep again. And this is because of that vata energy. So air and ether, a lot of high, if somebody's prone to anxiety, this can bring up anxiety in the early morning hours, just feeling ungrounded, waking up, movement, etc. And then kapha time, 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. I always like to illustrate this by thinking of like, okay, it's the end of a long work day. You snuggled up on the couch watching Netflix, starting at, we'll say like 8 p.m. And then 9 o'clock rolls around and maybe you're dozing off a little bit, about ready to just go to sleep. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, it's 11 p.m. and that second wave of energy hits, you get your second wind. All of a sudden, you're just awake, ready to watch all the stuff, all the reruns or whatever, Netflix, and you can't get to sleep then until 2 a.m. or midnight or something. For me, I'm a very pitta type of person. So I find that I get some of my best work done actually between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. And it's because of that pitta energy, that second wind. So same thing would be true for 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. A lot of us do also just do our best work between those hours in the middle of the day. And because pitta time is highest in the middle of the day, it is recommended in Ayurveda for us to have our biggest meal around lunchtime because Agni, or the digestive fire, is the highest. Just like the sun in the sky is highest around noon, our fire in our physical bodies is highest around noon. So one last example that I'll give, I experimented with this on my own, just trying to wake up before 6 a.m. versus after 6 a.m. because that's the mark between vata and kapha in the morning. When I had my alarm set to wake me up about 5:30, 5:45, I had a much easier time waking up than if I allowed myself to sleep past 6 a.m. Then all of a sudden I'm trying to sleep till like 8 or 9 a.m. So just because of the difference in energies, kapha, again, very heavy, earth and water type of energy. So some folks might have that 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. insomnia, and then they can't get to sleep again till 6 a.m. Then they're wanting to sleep until 10 a.m. Most of us can't typically do that, and then with nap time too, a lot of folks end up taking a nap between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. because we wake up, we get our day going, having coffee or whatever, then we're working through the middle of the day. And then all of a sudden, afternoon vata time rolls around again. And vata, being air and ether, can have us feeling spacey, just exhausted, not a lot of oomph, not a lot of energy. So a lot of people do get that 3 p.m. sometimes in the afternoon, just extra tired moment and end up having to take a nap. And then after their nap, they feel more energized again during kapha time, and the cycle just repeats and repeats. So that's time of day. The doshas also correspond with the seasons, as I already mentioned. So vata season is fall and early winter because we're getting drier, cooler, crunchier, air is cool and dry typically. And then kapha time is more so late winter to the middle of spring. And kapha, again, being earth and water, very heavy energy, the energy of building. So I think of springtime with the birds and the bees, right? Everybody reproducing and all the baby bunnies and all of the storms, the rain in the spring, new growth on the trees, very luscious kapha type energy, especially in the spring. Springtime is another time where folks tend to get sick, and that's because, again, vata increasing during seasonal transitions. And also kapha is related to congestion and mucus within the body. So like a lot of kids are really prone to mucusy type of sickness, just like stuffy nose or bronchitis, that type of thing, very kaphic because of the mucus. So we tend to see that, also seasonal allergies in the springtime. And then pitta time we're in right now, summertime with all these wonderful thunderstorms in the Midwest, and it's very hot, very humid. So we have fire and water in the air during the heat of summer. And then time of life. So this relates back to the question that was asked in the chat. I just mentioned kids tend to be prone to like respiratory things because kapha rules the respiratory system, and children are in the kapha phase of life. So if you think of kids, they're very like soft, usually almost squishy, you might say, flexible, elastic. You ever see a kiddo fall down? It's like they almost bounce because they're so like squishy and elastic, those kapha qualities, and then they heal really quickly too, right? Because this kapha energy, this time of life, a person's body is growing, cells are rapidly dividing, and with that, we just get an excess of things like mucus, and kids can be prone to infection too, but again, they generally are very resilient because of this kapha energy. And then pitta time of life encompasses adulthood, so anywhere from adolescence all the way up to menopause or andropause for folks. So the times that the sex hormones really start to initiate all the way until when the sex hormones start to decline. So I think of pitta time of life as being like the stress sandwich time of a person's life, because typically for a lot of folks, they're taking care of children. At the same time, they're taking care of elders, both of which need their support in a different way. But because people in that middle part of life in adulthood have this pitta energy, they typically have a lot of fire, a lot of motivation to care for folks as needed, and also just to direct toward their career and toward just like setting themselves up for life. So we can really use that pitta fiery energy in that main middle stretch of life in our adulthood. And then vata time of life is elderhood. So if you think of a person that has passed andropause, menopause, so anywhere from probably 60, 65 and older, these folks tend to start slowing down, get a little bit more dry, bones are brittle, skin is getting dry, hair is getting dry and falling out, wrinkles on the skin, creaky joints, that sort of thing, very vata. And I also, because vata is such a spiritual dosha, because of the air and ether, I love to think of the elder time of life, or the vata time of life, as being a time that is just full of wisdom. After the pitta time, after a person has really worked hard for their lives and gained a lot of just knowledge, then they can share that knowledge during the vata phase of life and help to mentor others and just share what they've learned with us. So it's a very spiritual, very wise time for many people, a time of service and giving back. And lastly, as I mentioned, the doshas also rule a certain part of our bodies. So this is not comprehensive. These are just the seats of each of the doshas. Kapha, being the structure producing dosha, I already mentioned, makes up our bones, our muscles, and fat. And the seat of kapha dosha is in the lungs and the stomach. So bile, mucus, and because it rules the lungs, it also is closely related with the throat, the nose, and the ears, because those all help us breathe. So if somebody had a kapha imbalance or had kapha in their constitution and then something gets aggravated, they might start seeing symptoms relating to these organs. Pitta dosha is the heat-producing dosha, and its seat is the liver and the small intestine. Think of all of the different secretions, digestive enzymes, and fluids that start in the mouth and work into the stomach, but really the liver is the powerhouse for all of that bile and so forth. And the small intestine is that place where the main transformation happens in our digestive system, where the food has been broken down and the small intestine then starts the process of actually absorbing, extracting, and assimilating the nutrients from that food. So it's quite literally like the fire within our bodies in these organs. So if somebody has a lot of pitta and or their pitta is aggravated, they might start to see symptoms related to these organs. And finally, vata, our movement producing dosha, is seated in the colon and the pelvis. Colon because we need air to move things through our digestive system. And this is where we'll tend to see like bloating, gas happening in the colon specifically. And vata also is related to upward flowing energy. So it's especially important for us to keep vata dosha balanced so that we don't have too much of that upward flowing energy, because vata's seat is in the colon. And so if it goes out of balance, then that's where we get the constipation. So we really want downward flowing energy, nice pacified vata within the body. All right, take a break here for a moment, take a breath. All right, now we get to the meat and potatoes of our presentation. 5 Ayurvedic practices that are generally recommended for everyone. And I say generally because remember, it depends. So these 5 things are something that I would recommend for almost every single person, but I'm sure that there are exceptions to the rule, right? So as with everything I've shared today, please listen to yourself and your body and only incorporate what feels right and sustainable and authentic for you, and just leave the rest, because while I do believe that everything I'm sharing can be helpful, I'm sure that there are situations in which it just might not be right for somebody. So, all right, before we talk about these 5 practices, we need to talk about Agni and Ama, which are very important concepts in Ayurveda. So I already mentioned a little bit about Agni, which is the digestive fire. So on a physical level, this is our body's ability to digest the food that we put into it and assimilate and absorb the nutrients from that food. And then on a emotional or energetic level, this is going to be digesting our experiences. So because most of us live this very vata aggravating lifestyle, because our culture is just very vata vitiating or aggravating, what happens is oftentimes we do not allow ourselves enough time to simply slow down and just simply be present, which is a big part of what helps the digestive fire to stay strong. I like to think of Agni as a literal bonfire. So in order to keep that fire burning strongly and just burning optimally, we need to make sure that we're not putting too much on it at once and then just walking away, right? We need to stay with that fire, tend to the fire, just give it a little bit at a time, make sure that it can actually digest and absorb any fuel that we're putting into it, and just pretty much stay constantly monitoring it in order for that fire to burn as brightly and as consistently as it can. So if that fire is burning brightly and consistently, we're likely to have very few digestive symptoms, very few health problems. If that fire is inconsistent, if it gets stronger and then weaker, or if it's chronically low and chronically weak, that's where we start to see a lot of symptoms and digestive and other types of health problems. There is the rare case where the fire can be too hot and burn us, but that is a I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's pretty rare. It's not something I see a whole lot. Most people are having more of the inconsistent burning or just low in general. So what happens when it's inconsistent or low? Then we get this ama, which is metabolic waste or toxic residue that builds up in our digestive system first. And then if it's left unchecked, the ama can actually spread to coat our organs. It can clog arteries. It can build up in the mind. It's actually described as being like a yellowish, whitish, sticky substance. If you think of like plaque on your teeth or plaque in your arteries, well, not your arteries, God forbid, but plaque in the arteries, I should say. This is a good kind of representation of what ama is considered to be. That's why I chose this picture of the orange with the mold growing on it. So it's this residue that builds up as a result of undigested and unabsorbed food on a physical level or experiences on a energetic level. So again, we can have ama in our mind as well and in our nervous system that can cause other types of symptoms like fear, overwhelm, etc. No matter what the nature of the ama is or where it's located, this is the root of all disease in Ayurveda. It's also related to vata because we have chronically high vata, then we have chronically low agni, typically. If you think of that bonfire again, and then just imagine just tons of air constantly just blowing on the bonfire. A little bit of air might make that fire go bigger, but too much air is going to start to smother the fire and put it out and make it weak. So that's the equivalent of chronic high vata. And then again, when our agni is chronically low, that's where we get this buildup of ama, which results in disease over time. So all of the 5 practices that I'm about to share with you are focusing on stabilizing agni, keeping it at a nice pace and keeping it burning consistently. And then through that, starting to remove ama if it has already built up, or just keep it from building up to start with. Okay, so the first practice, jiva prakshalan, this is tongue scraping. In Ayurveda, the tongue is considered to be a microcosm of the body. And a very good Ayurvedic practitioner or an Ayurvedic doctor will actually be able to just look at a patient's tongue and see what their imbalance is, what part of the body or what organ the imbalance is related to, and therefore be able to describe how to treat that imbalance. So we can do this ourselves to an extent just by simply observing every morning if we scrape our tongues. If you do scrape your tongue already, you know what I'm talking about. If you've never scraped your tongue, I highly, highly recommend it. I strongly believe that if you start to scrape your tongue, you will not be able to stop because you'll realize what was on your tongue all of this time and how disgusting it is. It's a very natural part of our human bodies and our human existence. Nothing wrong with it, but it is a little bit icky. So removing that stuff, we're actually removing the ama. Ama accumulates inside the mouth, especially overnight. So the best time to scrape the tongue is just in the morning. I've had people ask me a lot of questions about this or just not understand like the best method of scraping. So you only need to scrape your tongue 1 time a day. And that's first thing in the morning. Very, very, very first thing. Before you drink water, before you eat food, before you work out, anything. As soon as you wake up, go to the bathroom. Most of us have to pee. So go ahead and pee or whatever, and then scrape your tongue before you drink any water or do anything else. Reason being, we want to get that ama that's on our tongue out. If we're drinking water or eating food or anything else, we're likely to be swallowing that ama back down. And then the ama goes into the rest of our digestive tract and can cause just more buildup of what we don't want. So again, we want to get that ama out first thing that we do. Even if you get up to just pee and scrape your tongue and then go back to bed and lay down, that's totally fine, just as long as you're getting it out and off of you as soon as possible. And then after that, it's really nice to just drink water and I'm sure folks will notice a difference. It is kind of like night and day. Again, I can't not scrape my tongue because now I can taste the difference between when I haven't scraped my tongue and when I have. So, and we also want to get the digestive fluids kind of moving early in the day because the tongue is a microcosm of the body. It actually is a representation of the entire digestive system. So by stimulating the tongue, we can stimulate the entire digestive system, just priming the body and getting it ready to go for digestion. And it's just setting ourselves up for success throughout the day. So we're stimulating the tongue, getting the rest of the digestive system primed to digest food a little bit later on. This process also improves taste by just literally removing that ama from the taste buds, which in this sense, the ama is also just an accumulation of like bacteria and plaque and stuff like that. So removing it also eliminates bad breath and increases immunity because ama actually hurts our immunity. It makes us less immune, but removing the ama makes us more immune. So scraping the tongue, great way to increase immunity. And like I said, stimulates digestion. Somebody had asked me about just easy ways to incorporate Ayurveda into their daily lives. This is one of the easiest ways. I would recommend this for every single person, unless when you scrape your tongue, there's literally nothing that comes off, which is a great sign. That means that you're in good health. Unless that's you, I would recommend scraping your tongue every single day for everyone. And for most of us, there will be something that comes off. So just paying attention to the color and consistency of what comes off of your tongue. You might notice that some days it's extra thick, some days it's more thin and watery. For me, I notice that if I eat a lot of sugar, then the next morning when I scrape my tongue, that what comes off will be thick and white. And then other days, if I've eaten really healthy, it'll just be a thin film. If what comes off is yellow or green, that's indicative of pitta, too much pitta. If it's a little bit gray or brown, that's indicative of vata. And then if it's white, that is kapha. So just a great way to keep a little barometer on your daily health by looking at your tongue every day. So if you don't already own a tongue scraper, I do recommend buying a copper tongue scraper because copper is naturally antimicrobial. I have a copper tongue scraper and I've used the same one for probably like 7 years now. So it's like $10. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it in any health food store and it'll just last. If you get a good one, it'll last for quite some time. So super easy to incorporate. Highly recommend this practice. All right, the next practice is avoiding iced and carbonated drinks. So we've talked a lot about Vata dosha. Again, to reiterate, Vata dosha is air and ether. So if we're thinking about ice and if we're thinking about carbonation, what is the quality of those things? Ice is cold, crunchy, light. Carbonation is literally tiny air bubbles that you're drinking into your body. And so we're quite literally drinking Vata dosha when we're drinking like an iced soda or something like that. Because Vata dosha goes out of balance most easily, something like avoiding iced and carbonated drinks and just switching to warm beverages or at least room temperature can really, really go a far way when it comes to calming Vata dosha down. So by increasing Vata, the ice and the carbonation weakens Agni and overall disturbs digestion. If we go back to that visual of a bonfire and just imagine pouring tons of ice on that bonfire or soda on the bonfire, then of course the bonfire is going to start to just get weak and go down, right? Or at the best kind of sputter and then maybe get stronger, but maybe go out again. So, and then think about instead of ice and soda, think about pouring just a little bit of warm water or a little bit of lemon water on that fire. It's probably not going to have quite the same effect, right? It's still water, so it might sizzle and pop. But then think about pouring oil on a fire, like melted butter or ghee. Then that fire is likely to actually get bigger and stronger, right? So that's the basic concept. So when we're eating, warm or room temperature fluids are fine. just eating and drinking just a little bit with our food. For so many people, especially in the US, we go to a restaurant and what's the first thing that we get when we sit down? Big old glass of ice water, right? And it's really kind of silly. A lot of folks, that is when they're drinking most of their water is with their meal. But when we're drinking water, it is diluting the digestive fluids that are in our stomach and in our saliva. And we really need those digestive fluids to actually break down food instead. So if we're drinking too much water with a meal, and particularly if we're drinking iced and carbonated water or soda with a meal, it's just making it a lot harder on our bodies to actually digest whatever we're putting into it. So again, this practice is aimed at just priming the body and making it as easy as possible for our body to do what is naturally designed to do, what it is actually very good at doing when given the right circumstances. So nurturing the body with warm or room temperature fluids. If you're like, oh, I hate drinking warm things, that sounds awful, Paisley. Room temperature is fine, especially like right now it's summertime, or if it's hot where you are, if you have a lot of pitta in your constitution, you might go for a little bit of cool something and just put it in the fridge for a bit. Not cold though, and still no ice, because with Ayurveda, we want to always go kind of the middle path. We're avoiding extremes in general. And so something like a cool water can be okay. We just don't want super cold or super, super hot, because that's really hard for the body. And something else that gets talked about a lot in our culture is like, gotta stay hydrated, hydrate. I'm guilty of saying that because most people are dehydrated. But a common misconception is that if you just drink more water, then you're going to be more hydrated. Well, that's actually not true, because just like our bodies have to digest food and everything else that goes into it, whether that be a podcast or a book or a conversation or a text message or food or water, our body has to actually be able to digest and absorb what we're putting into it. So if we're just chugging down water, our body typically cannot actually absorb all of that at once. So just taking small sips throughout the day and then putting something like a little squeeze of lemon, or just taking warm water, or at least room temperature water, can really go a far way toward helping our body actually absorb that water. Because if we're just drinking tons of water and our body's not absorbing it at all, it's just flushing out all of the probiotics and good bacteria that are in our bodies. And there can be a time and a place for just flushing ourselves out, right? It's not bad to just drink a good amount of water in the morning and kind of get that morning flush going. But then throughout the day, you're just going to want to take smaller sips of water to stay hydrated, again, so that our body can actually absorb it. Because before our body can digest something like cold water, it has to expend a lot of energy to actually heat that water up, and then maybe it can start to absorb the water. So it's just making it easier for our bodies to actually absorb what we're giving it by giving it something that's a little bit more like pre-digested by just being warm. All right. So the next of the 5 practices is cooking with ghee or high quality oil of some sort. This goes back to our bonfire and the idea of pouring something like ghee or melted butter onto the bonfire versus pouring something cold or like ice or something onto the bonfire. So oil has kind of gotten a bad rap these days. And I just want to say, not all oil is created equal. Some oils are very, very highly processed and can just cause a lot of harm and damage in the body, while other oils are minimally processed. And as long as they're well sourced, they can create a great deal of benefit for our bodies, namely improving digestion, absorption, and assimilation of nutrients. I mentioned that most people are chronically dehydrated. And for a lot of folks, that's also due in part to a lack of high quality oils being in their diet. So Ayurveda recommends that we cook using high quality oils, such as ghee. Also avocado oil, coconut oil, something like sesame oil could all be good examples of other oils. Somebody asked me how to incorporate Ayurveda while avoiding dairy. You can certainly do that as well by just incorporating other high quality oils into your diet. Generally, anything that we can recognize the name of, like what is a canola? Nobody knows what a canola is. It's actually, it was a plant called the rapeseed plant, or I think it's still called the rapeseed plant. Sometimes you can still find rapeseed oil, but the companies that were producing that oil didn't want to market a product that had rape in the name of it. And so they actually changed it to just call it canola oil. But at the end of the day, again, what's a canola? That's not a whole food. That's just a random seed oil. Also something like palm oil, vegetable oil, soy oil, these kind of vague names for things. Those are usually red flags. If you can't directly identify like what the oil came from, that's a pretty good sign that it is a highly processed oil. So again, not all oil is created equal. Using high quality oils are good for all doshas in moderation. If somebody happens to have excess kapha, they would just want to use a little bit less oil, but they can still use it. Especially for vata dosha though, and I mentioned most people have a vata imbalance, oil is going to be the key. So you're experiencing constipation. I had somebody tell me that they are. If you're experiencing lots of gas, bloating, feeling ungrounded, overwhelmed, fearful, anxious, oil. Oil is the key, internally and externally. There's a process called abhyanga, which is the self-oil massage, where you basically coat yourself, your whole entire body from head to toe with warm oil. It is absolutely fabulous and magical. If anyone wants more information on that, I can send you a PDF. And that's a great way to calm down vata dosha when it's out of balance. It's also just very nourishing to the body. So eating ghee or oil as a regular part of our diet is the equivalent of doing that just on the inside of our bodies. So having this as a regular part of our diet can calm down the entire digestive tract. If there's inflammation or uncomfortable symptoms, it lubricates the body from the inside out, just helping, again, everything to be digested, absorbed, and assimilated, and then slide right on through so that we can be nice and regular, right? So know the quality and characteristics of the oil you are using. If you're not familiar with ghee, it is clarified butter or pure butter oil. So if you are lactose intolerant or otherwise have issues with digesting dairy, ghee is more likely than not going to be just fine for you. And that's because in the process of making ghee, they actually remove the milk solids from the butter. And so you just are left with a nice pure butter oil. And if you're buying ghee at the grocery store, I highly recommend looking for words like grass-fed, organic, minimally processed, no like additives, but mostly specifically for ghee, grass-fed and organic, especially if the butter or milk that was used to make the ghee was produced in the US. And that's because anything that is in the butter or milk that is used to make the ghee will actually become condensed within the ghee. So if those cows were exposed to like hormones or antibiotics, and then that ends up in the milk, that can actually become intensified within the process of making ghee. So to avoid that, we want to look for really high quality ingredients. Another way to approach that is to make your own ghee, which I highly recommend. It's a very nourishing and relaxing process. And for that, you would just get butter that is, again, grass-fed, organic at the very least, or you might go for imported butter like Kerrygold is a brand that's imported from, I believe, Ireland. And places in the UK just have a lot higher quality of manufacturing practices for animal products. So it's more likely to just be high quality butter. You can make it on your own at home. It's a very simple process, and just also makes your house smell really good and It's a lot cheaper too than buying ghee that's pre-made at the store. If you are vegan or just otherwise don't want to use ghee, I had somebody tell me they just don't like the taste of ghee. So you could use butter too if you're not vegan. But if you don't want to use any dairy products, again, other high quality oils like coconut oil, avocado oil, and so forth. And for those, you're going to want to look for labels like extra virgin, cold pressed, unpasteurized, unprocessed, things like that. Olive oil is also really good, extra virgin, cold pressed olive oil. The only thing with that is that olive oil has a low smoke point. So I'm recommending like avocado oil and coconut oil specifically, and ghee, because they all have a very high smoke point, meaning that you can cook at high temperatures with them without the oil becoming denatured. Something like olive oil has a pretty low smoke point. And so if you cook with it at a high temperature, it can actually become denatured, meaning that free radicals happen in the oil. And then when you take that oil into your body, it can cause inflammation. And then you would need to take antioxidants to counteract that inflammation. So I recommend just avoiding the inflammation in the first place by going with a high quality oil. And if you still want to have olive oil, that's totally fine. Just have it raw on something, salad or a piece of bread or something, or cook with it at a very low temperature. Okay, how you eat matters. The next of our 5 recommendations. So this is actually a bunch of recommendations rolled into one. And it really is important. So another thing that has personally helped me with Ayurveda is going back to this idea of Ayurveda being non-dogmatic or anti-dogmatic. It is not so much about what we eat as how we eat. Or you could say that at least the two are equally important. So you could totally eat a whole thing of Oreos. Oreos are one of my guilty pleasure foods. And you can just sit there and eat the whole thing while watching Netflix or whatever, and just be totally unconscious, totally not mindful, and suddenly look down and realize you ate them all, and you almost like didn't even realize it, right? That's the not Ayurvedic approach. The Ayurvedic approach is you can still have your Oreos. It's not the end of the world. You're not a bad person, whatever your food is. And if you sit down and just say, okay, I'm going to be very present with these Oreos, I'm going to chew them thoroughly, I'm going to be grateful for all of the farmers and plants and all of the hands that brought these Oreos to my plate. And I'm just going to be very, very present and mindful while I'm eating these Oreos. You might find that you just eat like 3 of them and feel like, okay, I'm good. Like that satisfied, whatever. And I'm going to just stop now because it's bringing that mindfulness in that really allows ourselves to stay in touch with our bodies and not have that shame. I feel like the idea of just like binging Netflix and binging whatever food is kind of rooted in shame, because if we're not fully mindfully aware and present of what it is that we're doing, and we don't have to feel that shame and that guilt of like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this or whatever. But if we override that shame and that guilt with the mindfulness and with the presence, then we can actually just be grateful to have food rather than telling ourselves like, oh, I'm such a bad person, or I am bad, or I'm being naughty right now. That kind of toxic like relationship to diet culture that tends to get kind of idealized. So how you eat matters. Whenever possible, choose a quiet and calm space for eating. This has to do with regulating our nervous system. You've probably heard fight or flight is like the sympathetic part of the nervous system, and then rest and digest is the parasympathetic or peaceful part of the nervous system. So if we're really upset, we're riled up, we're probably in that sympathetic part of our nervous system. And so we quite literally, our body cannot rest and digest. It's actually night and day difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic. Everything that happens in the body in the sympathetic or fight or flight activation, our digestive system pretty well shuts down. Like it is not happening. when we're in that parasympathetic, the rest and digest, then our body is doing just that. It's saying, okay, I'm calm. I'm not running from a bear right now. I can actually use this energy to digest this food. And so putting ourselves into that peaceful part of our nervous system by choosing a calm and quiet space for eating. If you work in an office building, you might have an opportunity to just go outside for lunch and sit at a picnic table so that you're getting the sunlight instead of fluorescent lights. And it might be more like quiet out there, and at least you're getting some air too. And all of that signals to our nervous system, okay, now it's time to just sit and eat and digest. In the US, something like 1 in 5 meals is eaten in the car. So most of us are eating while distracted. I don't know about you, but I sometimes get a little bit of road rage, being a fiery type. And so I'm probably at the least distracted, at the most angry if I'm driving in the car and trying to eat. So not an ideal situation for digestion, right? So trying to just sit down. A lot of folks stand as well while eating. Just literally sit down, take a moment, pause. You might say a little prayer over your food, and then just be very present with that food while you're eating it. Can work wonders for digestion. It doesn't matter if you're eating the best, highest quality, most expensive food available. If your body is not in a state to digest that food, it doesn't matter. It's just going to go through you. It's not going to be absorbed. And then the inverse is also true. If you're eating crappy, like processed food, but your body and mind is very primed and ready to actually digest that food, then you're going to be more likely to get some goodness from it because of our attitude. Our attitude toward the food and toward life really affects everything. And so our mindset, our relationship to that food or whatever it is can really affect how it affects us in our bodies once we take it in. If we're eating with an attitude of shame and guilt, then essentially that energy goes into our body. If we're eating with an attitude of gratitude and joy, then that's the energy that goes into our body. So a really quick and easy way, this is another great way to just incorporate Ayurveda into your daily life, is to pray over the food and eat with gratitude. Whether that's like an actual religious prayer that you say, or it could be a song, or just something very simple like I'm grateful. Any like little ritual that you want to put around eating can also be very, very powerful because that's directly imbuing the food or whatever it is that you're taking in. If you're a pot smoker or cigarette smoker, you can even do this with whatever you're smoking. Just literally setting an intention, putting gratitude into that thing, and then your body will receive it so much differently. And also the frequency of gratitude is one of the highest frequencies that humans can experience. And like I said in the beginning, we're very blessed to live in this time that's unprecedented in human history, where we can just walk into a grocery store and there's aisles and aisles and aisles of food. So just taking a moment to be grateful for that can go a long way. Grateful for the farmers, for the people that work at the grocery store, for whoever prepared the food, grateful to yourself, just for everything. And this is a really lovely way to just bring the practice of gratitude into your life 3 times a day, starting with gratitude for food, and it can kind of just go out from there into being grateful for everything, which is actually proven to reduce stress and improve our quality of life as well as our digestion. Okay, that's my whole thing on gratitude. Yay. Talking to myself with that one. And one of the last 2 bullet points, these are actually some of the most powerful on this whole slide: chewing food fully and slowing down. They really go together because once you start to properly chew, then you will actually just naturally slow down. I did this as an experiment on myself for 30 days, where for every single bite of food that I took, I made a point of doing at least 20 chews, which is what Ayurveda recommends. And you might say 20, oh my gosh, that seems like a lot of chewing. So, but for some of the bites, I actually went up to like 40 or more chews because I was aiming to get the food to liquid or paste every single bite that I took. If you think about it, there's not teeth anywhere else in our digestive system. There's only teeth in our mouth. So we have to use those teeth because once the food gets to our stomach churns the food and mixes it with our digestive fluids, but it can't chew the food and break it down more. So a lot of folks are eating really, really quickly, not chewing. They're basically swallowing food almost whole. And then they wonder, gosh, why does my stomach hurt? Why am I bloated? Why am I gassy? Why do I feel tired? And it's because simply we're eating too quickly and we're not chewing. We're not giving our body that opportunity to really digest the food. And we're making it so much harder than it needs to be for our bodies. So chewing food fully to liquid or paste. And in that experiment that I did with myself, my eating slowed down so drastically. That was years ago that I did this. Still to this day, I am the slowest eater of anybody that I know. My boyfriend makes fun of me. My friends make fun of me because I just eat so slowly. Like it's almost to a point where it's like inconvenient, which I know some of y'all resonate with because that is the reason that so many people eat so quickly, because they feel like, or even the reason why people stand to eat, because they feel like there's not enough time. And so again, this is a great way. It's really difficult, but if you can implement it, it has so many health effects, health benefits, because it forces us to just slow down and just be present. And when we do that, stress is reduced, digestion improves, that ama, physical and emotional or energetic agni can regulate and just really give ourselves that moment 3 times a day to really digest and integrate the day so far. It can be such a powerful practice. So highly, highly encourage, even if you can just do this once, 1 meal a day, it makes such a huge difference, I promise. All right, and then the last recommendation, which kind of goes with what I was just talking about, avoid overeating. So if we go back to the example of the Oreos and eating unconsciously, or we could say potato chips, whatever it is for you, and we're watching Netflix, and then all of a sudden we look down and, oh crap, I just ate the whole bag of potato chips. Where did that even go? It's like I didn't even remember doing it. And we're more than likely in that situation, we will have overeaten sufficiently. If we overeat, that is the #1 way that our agni goes down. Overeating smothers the fire of agni. If you think of that bonfire again, just imagine putting like 6 huge logs on that bonfire at the same time. If the bonfire is not really big and really going, it's not going to be able to burn those logs. It's going to get smothered by them and go out. So now let's take the opposite from that example. If I'm being really mindful and I'm eating my potato chips, I might find that I don't feel the need to eat so much because I'm really genuinely focusing on those potato chips and really just allowing myself to enjoy them and have gratitude for them. And because I am being present, I can notice a lot quicker when I feel full. You probably have heard that it takes 20 minutes for the signal to get from our stomach to our brain about when we're full. And so slowing down when we eat can help a lot with that, just for us to know like when we're truly full. What are some other ways to know when we're truly full? Ayurveda has other recommendations. So this picture here is showing the first recommendation, which is cupping the hands to know what size for your portion. And this makes sense, right? Because I'm sure you've heard, if you put your 2 fists together like this, that's about the size of your stomach. So then if you open your hands, that's about as much food as our stomach can digest at one time. And so allowing our bodies optimal time to digest in between meals. Ayurveda also recommends not snacking. And it's so that we can stoke that digestive fire. So rather than putting 6 huge logs on that bonfire at one time, we're just putting 1 log, making sure it gets really good and burning. And then once that's good and going, and we know that the fire can handle another log, then that's when we put another log on. We just do that consistently so that we're keeping that fire nice and steadily and brightly burning. Another suggestion that Ayurveda has to know when is our body full is the first burp. A lot of people will say, oh, I don't burp, or they just might not notice when they burp. If you're drinking lots of soda, then of course that's going to affect how much you're burping. If you're somebody that thinks that you never burp, it's likely that you are just not being mindful and present enough when you're eating, or you're distracted. So if you're genuinely slowing down and focusing, you will notice that there is a burp that comes. And it might be a small burp, but a burp nonetheless. And that's our body's built-in signal that, okay, it's time to stop eating. Anything that gets eaten after this first burp is not going to be digested very well because it's too much for Agni right now. So if you do try this, it's likely, if you have low Agni, which most people do, it's likely that that first burp is going to come way sooner than you want it to. If you keep practicing this though, then you'll be able to build up your Agni so that you're able to eat a little bit more each time without smothering the fire of Agni. So most of us, we're in this chronic overeating pattern. For most people, their biggest meal of the day is dinner time, which again, Ayurveda recommends our biggest meal of the day to be lunch. So if we're eating our biggest meal at dinner, and then maybe even snacking after dinner with Netflix and whatnot, then we're going to bed with full belly. When we go to bed with a full belly, when we're sleeping, that is our body's time to heal ourselves, to regenerate ourselves, to do what it needs to do. But if our belly is full with a heavy meal, it not only impedes our body's ability to use that energy for other things that could otherwise heal us and make us feel better, it also really stresses out the liver, which the liver digests all of our hormones and everything, cleanses our blood throughout the body. It's like so important. So we do not want to stress out the liver. We want to make sure the liver can do its job. And then further, if you eat too much at dinner, then you just have this heavy meal sitting in your belly all night, and you wake up in the morning, oftentimes we're not hungry. So if you're not hungry for breakfast, maybe you still end up eating something so that you're not hungry again later because you have to go to work. Or maybe you just end up not eating until like way later, like 1 p.m. Or maybe you don't even feel hungry until lunchtime. And this is not optimal for Agni. We ideally want to have a light dinner, go to bed so that our body can do its thing while we're sleeping, and go to bed having digested that dinner. So 3 or 4 hours before bed, we should eat dinner. And then in the morning, wake up and feel hungry so that again, we can have breakfast and go about our day. And this is a really great way to regulate energy. A lot of clients come to see me because their energy is like super up and down throughout the day, and they're having to drink tons of caffeine and then still getting that energy crash around like 2 or 3 p.m. So just having a proper eating pattern can really, really, really help with that. If you are someone like what I just described, I really recommend trying to have your biggest meal around lunchtime and a smaller meal for dinner. Go to bed after you digested your dinner, and then see how your energy levels are doing after a week or so of doing that. The last recommendation that Ayurveda gives for avoiding overeating is the 1/3 rule. So ideally, we would have 1/3 of our stomach being full of solid food that is really well chewed to like a paste consistency, 1/3 for liquid, whether that be the liquid that our food cooked in, or a beverage that we are having, maybe a little bit of water alongside the food, but preferably, especially if it's like soup or something, that liquid is coming from the food. And then 1/3 of the stomach left empty for gases to actually move through. And then the stomach can churn, like I said, to mix whatever we've eaten with the digestive fluids, and then prime the rest of our digestive system for smooth sailing. When I was talking about chewing too, one thing I didn't mention is we actually have digestive enzymes in our saliva that are unique, that do not show up anywhere else in our body. So if we're chewing really quickly or not chewing, we're we're not giving our body the opportunity to have those digestive enzymes that come from our saliva, which can inhibit digestion. So even if you're drinking a smoothie or drinking water or something like that, I recommend swishing it around in your mouth and then swallowing so that the food can get, or water, mixed up with your saliva so that those digestive enzymes end up in your belly, mixed up with the food. All right, this is a bonus recommendation. Eat khichdi. Haha, khichdi is so delicious, one of my favorite foods. I have a recipe on my website, which I will show you guys. And I also have make-at-home khichdi kits that are in jars that are available if you would like to try this for yourself. So khichdi is an Ayurvedic healing food. It's a staple of Ayurvedic cooking. It's comprised of an easy to digest blend of grains, legumes like lentils or beans, and then veggies, usually seasonal local veggies, spices to help with digestion, and ghee or some type of oil. And this mixture, it's created in such a way that it pre-digests the food in the pot. Heating food, cooking food is kind of like pre-digesting food before we eat it. So it helps our body be able to digest that food and assimilate it with minimal effort versus like raw food, salads, cold food, things like that. Generally not recommended in Ayurveda because of the same principle as why we don't eat like ice or cold water, because it's so much extra work for our bodies to actually digest those things, especially if it's raw. So our body has to heat up that food before it can even start to digest anything. And so raw food is not already pre-digested. Cooked food is pre-digested, so easy for the body to handle, especially if digestion is already impaired. So that's what khichdi is designed for. It's used in Ayurvedic healing methods to cure all sorts of different ailments and symptoms. It also has all 6 tastes in it. So Ayurveda recognizes 6 tastes, which are sweet, sour, bitter, salty, pungent, and astringent. In the standard American diet, we focus really, really heavily on the sweet, salty, and sour flavors. And we don't really get so much of the bitter, pungent, and astringent flavors that would typically come from something like a legume or dark green leafy veggies or digestive spices. And so khichdi has a really nice blend of all 6 of those tastes. And it's also customizable. So you can put whatever kind of spices you like in it. You can use whatever grains, legumes, and veggies that you like, and then whatever oil that you would like. So you can use that recipe that's on my website as kind of an inspiration and then just jump off from there. Somebody also, one of the questions that came through on the registration form was, how do I control these cheese cravings? I thought that was so funny and relatable because yeah, cheese, it's actually shown to be as addictive as cocaine. It actually lights up the same pleasure centers in our brain as cocaine would, or like heroin or some other pretty intense drugs. And it has properties in it that help us feel very calm and relaxed because it's meant for baby cows to soothe their nervous system. So on one hand, dairy products are very nourishing, very calming and soothing, but cheese, especially highly processed cheese, is one of those that it can wreak havoc depending on how the cows were treated and what was in the butter used, or the milk, I'm sorry, used to make the cheese. It can just be full of like pesticides and chemicals and crap, which can make it even more addictive. So I'm talking about this now because I was going to recommend to that person, if you're craving cheese specifically, first of all, that's very valid and normal. Most people do crave cheese if they like cheese. But also a way to combat that, 2 different ways. You can increase the sour taste in your diet from other things. That would be like kombucha or sauerkraut, naturally fermented things. Or you can lower your pitta, because cheese is the sour flavor And if we're craving the sour flavor, that's usually a sign that pitta has gotten pretty high and almost out of balance. It could be. I'd have to do a full assessment to know for sure. But if you are craving cheese, you can, like I said, find the sour taste in other areas of your diet. You can also just decrease your intake of cheese, which is hard at first, but then once the body is used to it, doesn't crave that input as much anymore. You can also find different sources of that same cheese, like a high quality version, grass-fed, organic, locally made cheese, and just have it in moderation. You could have something like a buttermilk or a yogurt that is still that kind of like creamy consistency of cheese without being like processed. Fresh cheese like paneer, which is used in Indian cooking, can be really nice, or cottage cheese, cream cheese are specifically good for pitta because they have more of the like creamy, soothing qualities of dairy without that sharp sour of the cheese. So if you're finding yourself craving extra sour cheeses, like stinky cheese or bitter cheese or aged cheese, try just switching to like cottage cheese and cream cheese and see how you feel from there. Okay, that was long-winded. So back to the khichdi. If you are somebody that struggles with fasting, you might want to try a khichdi cleanse. So you can use khichdi to fast by just eating only khichdi for 1 day, 3 days, or maybe up to 5 days, especially if you're working with an Ayurvedic counselor, in order to cleanse the digestive tract. And that's because, again, this is a very super easy to digest blend of foods. The digestive spices help everything be absorbed and assimilated, all with minimal effort from your own body. And so where with like a water fast or a juice fast, you might just find it really difficult, or there might be like the mind is cloudy or just a lot of emotions coming up because of the hunger. Something like a khichdi cleanse can be really nice because you're still giving your body sustenance, but it's easy enough to digest that it kind of just moves through the digestive tract and pulls out any like blockages, constipation, any digestive symptoms, and then gives your whole body a nice clean slate because it rekindles the fire of Agni. I highly recommend doing a khichdi cleanse during seasonal transitions specifically. So like I mentioned, summer to fall, fall to winter, winter to spring, spring to summer. Ayurveda recommends doing some type of cleanse or fast at those seasonal transitions every year because it helps ground Vata. And as I mentioned, Vata is what causes us to get sick a lot of the time, or just uncomfortable symptoms in general. So I've experimented with this as well, and I have not caught any of the seasonal flus or colds or anything like that for at least a couple of years now. And it's because I'm always doing this khichdi fast at seasonal transitions. Granted, I don't have kids, that plays into it a lot, but I encourage you to try out the khichdi fast, just see how you like it and if it actually helps you and improves your immunity and or your digestion. I'm just going to pull up on my website the recipe. So if you go to my website, it's yourloved.one, and then under the resources tab, recipes, this is the khichdi recipe. This is what it looks like. And this has more information about the health benefits of khichdi and then the recipe itself, how to make it. If you would like to try this, I also sell these khichdi jars. It's a make it home khichdi kit that has all of the ingredients on that page that I just showed you on my website. So all the same spices, same measurements are here. And then there's some rice. This one I also put quinoa, and it has green mung beans in it. I have a couple of variations on this, but this has everything you need to make the khichdi except for the ghee and if you choose to use vegetables. Somebody did mention that they struggle with eating too much fiber at times. So if that's you can totally make the khichdi without the vegetables. That's not a requirement. All right. We are at our question and answer portion. And I know that I just shared so much information with you. So let's just take another moment. My friends that are here live, go ahead and put any questions you may have in the chat. And I'm just going to address some of these questions from the registration form that I did not get to, that folks who are going to be watching the recording had submitted. So while I'm doing that, if you have any other questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. And
so good. Like, this information is amazing.
thank you, Lizzie.
I have like 6 pages of notes on it already.
Nice. Yeah, and just for everyone to know, I am going to be emailing you with a PDF for the list version of the 5 practices that we just talked about and the slides for this presentation. So you'll have the video, the slides, all the information. And for those of you, whether you're live or watching the recording, always feel free to reach out to me with more questions. So somebody in the registration form was asking about how to encourage regular bowel movements. And that same person also mentioned that they have a hard time sleeping. So that sounds like classic Vata imbalance to me. Again, I'd have to do a whole assessment to know exactly what's going on, but odds are she was doing some other really healthy things. So odds are it's just chronic high Vata. So the main ways we would combat that are improving Agni with these 5 practices that we're talking about, and calming Vata. So oil, really amazing for that, whether it's taken internally or externally through the self-oil massage called Abhyanga. And Abhyanga too really helps with sleep. Oh my gosh, I sleep like a baby after I do that practice. So if you're interested in that, just contact me. I'll be happy to send that to you. That same person also mentioned dealing with heartburn. So heartburn can be a couple different things. For some people, it's high pitta or too much heat in the body. And so you would want to do cooling practices. For a lot of people, though, it's actually Vata, because when we have low Agni, a way that our body responds to the struggle with digestion is with symptoms, digestive symptoms. And that can show up for different people as heartburn, constipation, gas and bloating, and so forth. So I would still work on Agni first and foremost for help with that. Okay, we already talked a little bit about the dairy-free, and there are good dairy-free products on the market. I would just encourage you to check out ingredients. We still want to go for minimally processed, as few ingredients as possible. So I generally would not recommend a lot of the like vegan cheeses that are on the market, because some of them, they're just like so processed. You're honestly better off eating a real cheese as long as it's like well sourced and everything. I know might be sacrilegious to say. And a past version of me might be like, oh my gosh, you're telling people to eat cheese, but cheese can have really healthy benefits like probiotics to it, just a natural boost to our gut microbiome as long as it's like well sourced. So in my opinion, something like that can actually be better than these super, super processed vegan cheeses and products that are on the market. That's just my spiel about that. You can also make your own. That person that was asking about that mentioned that they do almonds. So you could make your own almond milk, almond butter. People make cheese with almonds. You can make almond ricotta. Yeah, there's like so many things. That person was also asking about gluten-free, which you're in luck with Ayurveda because we encourage so much eating legumes and grains. So just get diverse with the different grains that you're eating, veggies, legumes, and it's easy enough to be gluten-free while practicing Ayurveda. How to easily bring Ayurveda into the daily routine. I think all of those 5 practices that we talked about are, I mean, they're easy in principle. In practice, they can be rather challenging, but once you incorporate them, they are absolutely life-changing. And that is my personal experience, but I've also seen that to be true in my clients as well. So Easy in principle, difficult in practice, super amazing health benefits though. And nothing that requires you to like go out and buy a lot or like pay for expensive supplements. You know, these are all things that you can do right now on your own at home without having to like work with me one-on-one, even though I would love that. And you're certainly welcome to work with me one-on-one. Any of you that are interested, I do have one more spot available for August. If you would like to work together with Ayurveda, I would just need to talk to you by the end of July. Otherwise, we're looking at September. Cheese cravings, I already addressed. And also just having a mindset with cheese, like any other food, of not vilifying it. There's no food that's inherently good or bad. There's no substance or really anything that's inherently good or bad. It's more about our relationship to that thing. I can hear some of you guys going, what about heroin? Heroin seems inherently bad. Yes, and I won't dig myself deeper into a hole on that. My point is that it's our relationship to the thing rather than the thing itself. Somebody mentioned seeds, do not agree with them. My recommendation with that, or with food allergies in general, increase Agni. Always, always, always want to make sure that you're good with Agni, because when your Agni is truly good, you are able to digest most anything. And then also probiotics. So you can get probiotics in capsule form, like at the health food store, or kefir, kombucha, yogurts, healthy ferments like sauerkraut, kimchi can really help boost your microbiome in order to help with allergies of all sorts, and also just being able to digest certain things. And if there's certain things that you know does not agree with your body, that's fine. Just keep them out of the diet until your Agni is strengthened, and then you might consider reincorporating some things. And the person that has a condition with flare-ups where they're not able to eat fiber, I already somewhat touched on that, but again, just boosting Agni. And then you might consider trying the khichdi, but just a really watered down version of it. So you would add maybe like half of the amount of the legumes, or you can do it without the legumes altogether. Because if you know the fiber is not going to work for you, you can literally just make a version of khichdi that is just grain, spices, water, and oil, and just have that and see how that agrees with you. But above all else, I would try to avoid or prevent the flare up to start with by just boosting Agni through all of the other things that we talked about. Okay, that was my list of questions from the registration. In the chat, we have, if someone sweats excessively, can Ayurveda help them to sweat less? Ah, that's an interesting question. Sweating excessively is not inherently a bad thing. It is a sign that there's something going on though, and it can cause dehydration. So for that, we would look at understanding, like, is there a pitta imbalance going on? What is the underlying cause of the excessive sweating? What is the body trying to mitigate with the sweating? And then just getting rehydrated too. So room temperature, warm water, make Ayurveda Gatorade, which is just warm water with a little squeeze of lemon or lime juice, a little pinch of salt, and then can use either honey or maple syrup, just a little bit. And then that creates like a natural Gatorade. Another thing that I love to do is watermelon in the blender with lime juice and just make a watermelon slushy like that. What was the oil bath thing called? Abhyanga. I'll put it in the chat. Abhyanga. Hopefully I'm spelling this right. Abhyanga. That is self-oil massage in Ayurveda. So wonderful. And the oil you would use would be the same standards for the oil that you would use like in your food, because our skin absorbs the oil. So anything that we put on our skin, we would want to have it be high enough quality that we could also consider eating it. And the type of oil that would be most recommended would just depend on your dosha. All right, we're ending right on time. Does anyone else have any questions?
I'm good. That was really amazing.
Good. Wonderful. Well, as I mentioned, anyone has questions after absorbing some of this information, feel free to contact me. And I would love to work one-on-one with you if anyone is interested in that. And then otherwise, just check out your inbox and I will send everyone resources from today.